Alright, so hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're exploring a system that affects us legitimately every single day. And sometimes, we don't even think about it. The answer is the fashion industry. Something else that we will be exploring is what happens to our clothes after we throw them away. Right now, fashion operates more in a linear system where clothes are produced, worn briefly, and completely discarded. This is something that has led to about 92 million tons of textile waste every single year, overwhelming waste systems around the world. What's even more concerning though is much of this waste is exported to lower income countries like Ghana, creating environmental and social inequalities. In our project, we focus on waste management in the fashion industry, examining where the system fails and how we can create meaningful change.
In a perfect circular system, old clothes will be recycled into new ones. However, our current system is linear, meaning it's a one-way street straight to the trash. The problem is that we are making things that nature can't digest. These materials don't break down, meaning they are non-degradable. They leak out of waste management systems and end up in places they shouldn't be, like the ocean. So, the biggest challenge in our life cycle assessment is the end of life stage. The industry creates about 92 million tons of textile waste a year. This is no longer just a disposable issue, this is a global issue that proves the sheer scale of the problem is too much for our current waste systems to handle. This massive volume of waste becomes even more dangerous because 90% of these clothes are blended of cotton and plastic. As this waste sits in landfills or washing machines, it sheds tiny fibers, leaving 500,000 tons of microplastics into the ocean annually, where they eventually enter the human food chain. Beyond this physical pollution, the entire process fuels climate change by emitting 1.2 billion tons of carbon dioxide, which accounts for nearly 10% of global emissions. This isn't just from sewing, the impact is driven from the massive heat needed in dyeing mills to color the fabric and the logistics needed to ship these materials across the globe.
There's also environmental racism and injustice present in the fashion industry, where the high-income countries are basically doing colonialism or environmental colonialism over the South by using them as a pressure valve for their overconsumption. While people think that they're helping by donating clothes, the reality is that countries like Ghana, Bangladesh, and India are being used as the world's landfill. 90% of the garments are made of plastics, and so it just makes microplastic that end up flowing into groundwater and rivers of these communities. This is a clear example of environmental racism because the profit of the industry, which is $1.7 trillion, stays in the north while the south just receive the trash. And so the profit, the price of fast fashion is paid by residents of the global south who face severe respiratory issues from open air burning of textile mountains and water toxicity from the 79 trillion liters of contaminated water by just the dyeing mills every year. This system survives by exploiting children and women who are being underpaid below a living wage and who have to sacrifice their health and the right to a clean environment to meet a global need they did not create.
The fashion waste system is driven by global political and socioeconomic power imbalances. Fashion brands and retailers in high-income countries control pricing, production speed, and design decisions, while manufacturers in low and middle-income countries are forced to compete under intense pressure. This buyer-driven supply chain pushes factories to produce clothing as cheaply and as quickly as possible, often at the expense of fair wages, safe working conditions, and environmental protections. As a result, most of the profit remains with the brands and consumers in high-income countries, while those social and environmental costs are borne by workers and communities in low to middle-income countries. The true environmental and social costs of fashion, such as pollution, carbon emissions, water contamination, and waste, are not in the price of clothing. This allows companies to maximize profits while shifting the burden of waste and environmental damage onto governments, taxpayers, and vulnerable communities. This system encourages overproduction and overconsumption. Policies such as the Extended Producer Responsibility Act can hold companies accountable for the full life cycle of their products, including disposal and recycling. Additional measures may include stricter regulations on waste exports, higher environmental standards for production, and incentives for circular economy practices. Ultimately, meaningful change depends on shifting responsibility from the consumers and marginalized communities back to the corporations that drive production and profit from the system.
Now that we have learned all about all this information, all these damages that the textile industry does to all of us as a consumer, how can we use all of this information? Well, we can use all of these informations and education as a leverage to do a more educated consumer buying, a more educated guess on the future, a much more aware masses. By using all of this information, we also create a feedback loop. Let's be real. All of the information that we've gathered came from a source. Now that we have used all of these sources and gathered all our opinions, all our findings, we can help make the future generations create a much more educated research if ever this research is published, if ever this chart is published, or the future generations will use this as a base on other more findings or other more actions if possible.